There are films that feel like a pulse racing under your skin, stories that don't just unfold in front of you, but carry you into their rhythm until you're no longer just watching. You're living inside them. Welcome, dear friends, to this shared corner where literature and cinema entwine. I always think of you, not as faceless viewers, but as fellow travelers, people who crave stories that challenge as much as they entertain, who find joy in untangling meanings rather than chasing surface thrills. Before we begin, I'll gently ask that if you find resonance here, if you feel at home in these explorations, you like and subscribe. It's not about numbers. It's about nurturing this circle where art and ideas can flow. And let me say clearly, this is not a traditional movie review. This is not about ratings, not about whether you should buy a ticket or not. It is a deeply intellectual, theoretical reflection meant for those who approach films as we approach literature, with curiosity, with reverence, with a desire to understand what lies beneath. For me, the film we'll be unraveling today carries a strange personal echo. I remember the first time I encountered it, not in a crowded theater, but on a quiet night alone, the kind of night when the world feels heavy and you're searching for something that will stir your mind awake. I pressed play, expecting action, explosions, and a few chases, the usual adrenaline of spy thrillers. What I found instead was a meditation disguised as a chase sequence, a story about identity, memory, and the unending question of who we are when the world insists on defining us. I think that's why it stayed with me. Not because the punches landed, but because the silences between them asked questions I was already asking of myself. Questions about past choices, about the gap between who we think we are and who the world has written us to be. When I think about this film, I think of momentum. Everything about it moves, flows, propels. The camera itself seems restless, following, chasing, never content to stay still. It mirrors the main character's life, a man who cannot pause because the past will catch him if he does. But beneath the rush is the weight of reflection. The story, at its heart, isn't about running away. It's about running toward the truth, toward clarity, toward a moment where the fractured self finally finds coherence. And isn't that a literary theme as old as time? Odysseus finding his way home, Hamlet circling the shadow of his father's death, Faust bargaining for knowledge. The chase here is not just across rooftops, but across the terrain of identity itself. The film opens with unease, a body in perpetual motion, hunted and haunted. From the first breath, we are pulled into pursuit. Of him, of the truth, of answers to questions that linger like smoke. The world around him is not merely dangerous. It is orchestrated to keep him from remembering, from assembling the fragments of himself. Each city he traverses, Moscow, London, Tangier, New York, becomes both a landscape and a metaphor. Cities are memories here, layers of the self he is trying to retrieve. As he moves, so do we, carried along in a rhythm of fractured recollections and relentless pursuit. The overview of the film, if I were to describe it to someone who had never seen it, would sound deceptively simple. A man with no clear memory, hunted by governments, seeking to uncover who he truly is and what was done to him. But beneath that is the literary richness. It's a narrative about control, about how institutions write our stories for us, about how names and identities can be constructed like dossiers. The protagonist becomes both detective and mystery, chasing not only enemies but himself. And the brilliance of it lies in how action becomes philosophy. Every leap across a rooftop, every fistfight in a dim stairwell is really a battle with a void of memory. The plot unfolds like pages turning too quickly to catch every word. We see him follow trails, sift through fragments, and each lead takes him deeper into the machinery that created him. There are scenes of electrifying chase, fights choreographed with brutal intimacy, escapes so close they leave the audience breathless. But what lingers is not the mechanics of action. It's the silence afterward, the look in his eyes as fragments of memory return. A training program, a past soaked in manipulation, a life that wasn't chosen but constructed. These revelations cut deeper than bullets because they force the question, what does it mean when your history belongs not to you, but to those who wield power over you? There are moments that still play in my mind like echoes. A narrow alley chase that feels like a poem written in urgency. A confrontation with an old mentor where silence says more than dialogue ever could. A rooftop pursuit in Tangier where every leap feels like an allegory for survival. And the final confrontation, not an explosion of violence, but a quiet unmasking of truth, where the man finally stares into the face of the machinery that built him. These are not simply twists in a thriller. They're turning points in a novel of the self, chapters in a long arc of one man reclaiming his humanity. And yet, even as the film answers questions, it leaves others hanging in the air, unresolved and haunting. Who are we, if our past is written by others? Can we ever escape the fingerprints of institutions, of governments, of family histories, of trauma? The story teases resolution, but never offers it fully, and that ambiguity is what makes it powerful. It invites us to sit with the discomfort of unfinished identity, to recognize that perhaps we are all works in progress, always piecing together fragments of memory and meaning. What excites me most about this film is how it disguises philosophy in the trappings of adrenaline. On the surface, it is a chase movie, a spy thriller, an action spectacle. But underneath, it is literature. It asks the same questions that novels have asked for centuries, that poets whisper in midnight lines. Who am I? And who has the right to tell me who I am? In that sense, watching it feels less like watching a blockbuster and more like leafing through a novel where every chapter is punctuated by the slam of a door, the crack of a fist, the echo of footsteps down an empty corridor. I think of the way it made me feel when I first watched it. The strange recognition that even in a life far removed from espionage and global conspiracies, the search for self is universal. We may not be hunted through crowded train stations, but we are haunted by our own questions, our own pasts, our own battles to reconcile who we are with what the world insists we must be. That's why it resonates with me still, because beneath the spectacle is the simplest, most human of quests. So, dear friends, as we dive deeper into this film together, think of it not as entertainment, but as text. Think of the rain-soaked streets and rooftop leaps as metaphors. Think of the shifting cities as chapters in a novel of the self. Think of the silences between action as the spaces where philosophy seeps through. And let us journey forward with that awareness, not searching for a neat conclusion, but embracing the questions it leaves us with. For in those questions lies the true brilliance of this story. The story begins as if waking from a fever dream, but instead of relief, there is only pain. A man staggers through the shadows of Moscow, wounded and hunted, his very body a ledger of past violence. The night air cuts cold, the city around him indifferent, yet he cannot stop. Each step is survival, every breath borrowed. There is no comfort, only pursuit. The authorities are closing in, yet he is not only fleeing them. He is fleeing the fragments of memory that threaten to surface with every flash of light, every echo of a voice he almost recognizes. What unsettles most in these opening moments is not the bullets or the chase, but the weariness etched into him. He is not a hero running toward glory. He is a man running from ghosts. He slips through alleys, hides in shadows, stitches his own wounds with trembling hands. In these moments, we see the paradox of his existence, impossibly skilled, yet profoundly broken. His body obeys with lethal precision, while his mind trembles under the weight of questions he cannot answer. Who made him this way? Why was he chosen? And most hauntingly, who was he before he became this ghost? The story soon shifts across borders, across oceans, each transition as disorienting as memory itself. In London, in Madrid, in Tangier, fragments begin to assemble. Documents appear, dossiers half-burned, names that mean everything and nothing. He follows these trails not with certainty, but with desperation. Each clue is both promise and threat, promise of identity, threat of deeper betrayal. Watching him sift through scraps of information is like watching a man dig through the rubble of his own life, hoping to find the foundation still intact. Yet the deeper he digs, the more he finds only more debris. The authorities he flees are not faceless shadows. They are institutions, governments, entire systems that see him as both asset and liability. To them, he is not a man but a file, a weapon crafted and now out of control. Their pursuit is relentless not because he is guilty, but because his very existence threatens their secrecy. The chase sequences that follow, through train stations, across rooftops, down narrow alleys, are not just physical thrills. They are embodiments of paranoia. The camera jolts, stumbles, rushes, never steady, as though it too is caught in the breathless rhythm of pursuit. Watching it feels like inhabiting his paranoia, our hearts sinking with his as he slips just beyond the reach of capture again and again. Amid this relentless motion, there are quieter moments that pierce deeper than any chase. A conversation with a reporter who has stumbled onto the edges of the story. A glance exchanged with an old contact whose loyalty is brittle under fear. Each encounter reminds him, and us, that identity is fragile, constructed not only from memory but from how others name us, frame us, use us. He's trying to remember himself, yet at every turn, someone else insists on defining him. One of the film's most electric sequences unfolds in Tangier, where rooftops become battlegrounds. He chases an assassin through narrow streets, the city sprawling in sunlight and dust, the rooftops echoing with footsteps. The chase is brutal, desperate, bodies crashing through windows, fists meeting with bone-crunching force. But what lingers is not the choreography. It is the desperation on his face, the urgency not only to survive but to protect, to stop another life from being erased by the same machinery that once erased his. In this chase, we glimpse something beyond survival, a moral pulse, fragile but insistent, beating beneath the layers of training and violence. What threads through every scene of this first half is the theme of fragmentation. He is piecing himself together, but every fragment leads not to wholeness but to further fracture. Each revelation opens another wound. Each memory recovered raises the question, is knowing worth the pain it brings? Yet he cannot stop. There is no choice but to continue, because the truth, however brutal, is the only path to reclaiming humanity. As the first half draws toward its midpoint, the net tightens. The authorities close in, the assassins grow bolder, the fragments of memory become sharper. He is no longer running only from those who chase him, but toward a confrontation he both craves and fears, the confrontation with the men and the machinery that made him what he is. And as viewers, we sense it too. The inevitability of revelation, the certainty that the second half will not offer escape but reckoning. The brilliance of this part of the story lies in how it refuses to let us breathe. Even in the moments of silence, the tension hums. We are caught in the same paradox as him, desperate for answers, yet terrified of what those answers will mean. The first half ends not with resolution, but with acceleration, the chase narrowing, the truth inching closer, and the man at the center more haunted than ever. The second half of the story surges forward like a tide that can no longer be held back. The man we've been following, already scarred by pursuit and fragmented memory, now finds himself pressed into corners where choices narrow, where every revelation feels like both triumph and punishment. He is closer to truth than ever, yet the truth is jagged, waiting to cut deeper than any blade. The rhythm of the chase intensifies, carrying us through cities and across continents, each location unfolding like another chapter in his reluctant memoir. In Madrid, in New York, in the sterile corridors of institutions that once fashioned him into a weapon, fragments align into patterns too clear to ignore. Files surface, coded phrases repeat, names recur like refrains in a dark poem. The machinery that created him is revealed not as a rogue project, but but as part of a vast system of sanctioned brutality. He is not anomaly but design, not accident but outcome. Each discovery stings because it strips away the illusion that he was victim of a singular conspiracy. Instead, he was one thread in a tapestry woven from state secrets and moral compromises. His personal crisis becomes universal. If one man can be rewritten so completely, then what hope does anyone have of claiming ownership of their own story? The plot tightens around his interactions with allies who may not be allies, with journalists who risk everything to shed light, with handlers who alternate between hunting him and pleading with him. The tension of these exchanges lies not in action, but in words left unsaid, in glances that betray fear. He moves like a ghost through these lives, disrupting them, awakening them, sometimes dooming them. His journey is a reminder that seeking truth rarely liberates, it implicates those who help him pay the price. The machinery of control is relentless, and anyone who dares to question it is consumed. One of the film's most electrifying sequences unfolds on the streets of New York, where traffic jams and city noise become backdrop for a cat-and-mouse pursuit. The editing fractures time, cutting between vehicles, glances in mirrors, shouts into radios. The chase is relentless, but it is not spectacle for its own sake. It mirrors his state of mind, fragmented, chaotic, hunted from all sides. The camera refuses to grant us a wide, stabilizing view. Instead, it jolts and crashes, throwing us into the disorientation of pursuit. The city, indifferent and sprawling, becomes both shield and trap. By the end of this sequence, breathless and battered, we sense the inevitability. The circle is closing, and the final revelation is near. Memory becomes sharper now, less fragment and more narrative. He recalls training rooms, cold voices, the rituals of erasure that turned him into a tool. He remembers faces, names, moments of choice that were never choices at all. These recovered memories are not gifts. They are wounds. They confirm what he feared, that his past is soaked in complicity, that his hands are not only victims of control, but instruments of it. The man who has been searching for self finds that the self he uncovers is unbearable. This is the heart of the tragedy, that the quest for identity may reveal not who we want to be, but who we never wish to become. The final act takes him into the very heart of the program that birthed him. The setting is sterile, clinical, stripped of warmth. An institution where memory was erased, where humanity was overwritten. As he walks these corridors, the ghosts of his past steps echo. He sees himself as he once was, a recruit, a man willing to surrender his name, his morality, his identity for the promise of purpose. The realization is crushing, that he was not merely victimized but complicit, that he agreed to become what he now despises. This confrontation with self is more brutal than any fight, more violent than any chase. It is the collision of past and present, of man and ghost. The climax does not erupt in explosions, but in quiet revelation. He confronts those who orchestrated his erasure, but instead of vengeance, what he seeks is clarity. The truth, finally, is spoken. The project's name, its methods, its crimes, his own role within it. The confrontation feels less like victory and more like unmasking. There is no catharsis here, only the hollow satisfaction of knowing. Yet within that hollow space lies choice. He can continue his weapon, or he can step outside the machinery altogether. In the silence that follows, we sense his decision. He will not kill for them again. He will not be their ghost. He reclaims his name, not to glorify it, but to own it. But the machinery he leaves behind is not destroyed. The program continues. Shadows still whisper. Institutions still bury their sins. His victory is personal, not systemic. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth, that no matter how far we run, the world remains what it is. We may reclaim ourselves, but we cannot dismantle the structures that seek to erase us. His story ends not with salvation of the world, but with a fragile reclamation of self. And that, in its honesty, resonates more deeply than any triumphant finale could. The second half of the film lingers in memory because it refuses to grant easy closure. It answers questions, but in answering, it raises more. It shows us the cost of truth, not just to the man who seeks it, but to everyone around him. It reveals identity not as discovery, but as burden, as something to be carried with grief as much as with pride. And it ends with a silence that feels more powerful than any explosion, a silence in which we're left to reflect on our own complicities, our own erasures, our own searches for self. This is the brilliance of the narrative's conclusion. It denies us escape. We leave not with resolution, but with resonance, carrying the weight of his journey as if it were our own. The second half is not merely plot, it is reckoning. A reckoning with memory, with power, with the fragility of identity itself. And when the screen fades, we are left still chasing the same question he has chased across continents and years. Who are we when the stories of our past have been written by others? Characters are the marrow of this story, the very elements that transform a sequence of chases and fights into something literary, something enduring. Without them, the film would be spectacle. With them, it becomes meditation. Each figure carries not only the weight of plot, but the burden of philosophy, embodying questions about identity, power, and choice. To walk through these characters is to walk through the architecture of the film's soul. At the center stands a nameless man who eventually reclaims his name. He is a paradox, both weapon and wounded, predator and prey, master of his body yet slave to his past. What draws us to him is not simply his skill, the way he moves through cities, dismantling threats with efficiency, but his humanity flickering beneath it. He is a man fractured, haunted by glimpses of another life. His eyes often betray what his fists do not, the exhaustion of being hunted, the ache of not knowing himself. His journey is not about victory over enemies, but about victory over erasure. In literature, he would stand alongside figures like Frankenstein's creature or Kafka's K. Beings forged by systems, defined by others, struggling desperately to reclaim a self that was stolen. That is why we lean forward when he pauses, when silence hangs heavier than gunfire. He is searching for what we all search for, coherence in a world that seeks to define us. What fascinates me most is his relationship to memory. For him, memory is both gift and curse. Each fragment recovered answers a question, but opens a wound. He learns that he was not only victim, but participant, that his transformation into a weapon was not entirely against his will. This complexity makes him tragic. He is not simply wronged. He was complicit in his own undoing, blinded by the seduction of belonging, of purpose. That recognition makes his reclamation of self more poignant. He is not reclaiming innocence. He is reclaiming responsibility. And perhaps that is the truest form of identity, not purity, but ownership of our flaws. Around him orbit figures who embody different responses to the same machinery. There is the weary handler, whose job it is to contain and control him. She embodies the system's pragmatism, the face of bureaucracy that insists in justifying means. Yet even within her, we glimpse doubt, hesitation. She represents the moral grayness of institutions, not monsters, but people who justify cruelty as necessity. In her conversations, we hear the rationalizations that make atrocities possible. She fascinates me because she is not villain, not hero, but mirror, showing us how easily compromise becomes complicity. Then there is the restless journalist, a figure who represents curiosity, the human drive to seek truth even when it threatens safety. His role is brief yet vital, because he reminds us that truth is never private. The moment the protagonist seeks answers, he draws others into danger. The journalist's fate underscores the film's cruel honesty, that seeking to reveal systems of power often leads not to liberation, but to silencing. His presence lingers because he shows how fragile truth is, how easily it can be crushed beneath the weight of secrecy. The assassins who pursue the protagonist might appear, at first, as mere obstacles. Yet in them lies another mirror. Each one is a version of who he might have remained had he not begun questioning. They are him without doubt, him without hesitation, pure weapons, loyal to the program. Their efficiency terrifies not only because of their skill, but because they show what he could have been if he had never sought himself. In their faces, we see the roads not taken, the lives unlived. Their deaths are not triumphs, but mournful reminders of what it means to be unawakened. Supporting figures, contacts, allies, fleeting helpers add texture to his journey. A woman who once trusted him, still torn between fear and loyalty. A colleague who risks too much, believing he deserves truth. These characters, though secondary, give the narrative its heartbeats. They remind us that identity is not forged in isolation, but in relationship. Every person he touches, every ally he loses, every betrayal he endures shapes the man he becomes. He is not only reconstructing memory, he is reconstructing a moral community, however fragile. The institutions themselves function as character. Government agencies, shadow programs, bureaucratic rooms filled with dossiers and screens. They breathe with menace, as though alive. They are faceless yet omnipresent, like a modern-day Leviathan. In them, we see the embodiment of control, systems that rewrite names, that erase pasts, that treat humans as tools. The protagonist's greatest enemy is not a single individual, but this faceless machinery. It is literature's oldest antagonist, the system that devours individuality. Think Orwell, think Kafka, think Dostoevsky's interrogators. The same shadows loom here. What elevates the character dynamics is the interplay of silence and speech. The protagonist speaks sparingly, his silence carrying more weight than monologues. Others speak around him, orders barked, reports whispered, justifications offered. His silence becomes resistance. He will not grant them the power of naming him with words. He seeks instead the power of knowing himself. This inversion fascinates me, because it shows how even withholding speech can be character, how silence itself can be rebellion. Emotionally, what lingers are not the punches or the gunshots, but the moments when humanity cracks through. The hesitation before killing. The flicker of guilt when an ally suffers because of him. The weariness in his posture when memory cuts too deeply. These moments remind us that he is not myth, not legend, but man. And it is precisely his humanity that makes the story endure. Without it, the film would be another entry in the genre. With it, it becomes literature disguised as action. The characters around him, from handlers to assassins, from journalists to allies, weave a chorus of voices, each offering a different answer to the question. How should one live under systems of control? Some comply, some question, some resist, some are destroyed. Together, they form a tapestry of human responses, and within that tapestry, the protagonist's struggle resonates as universal. He is not alone, though he often feels alone. His search mirrors ours, his burden reflects ours. This, for me, is why the characters matter. They transform spectacle into story, chase into meditation. They embody philosophies, force us to confront our own choices. They remind us that identity is never solitary, that every self is shaped in relation to others. And when the story ends, what we remember most are not only the rooftop chases or the crashes in crowded streets, but the eyes of the man who finally reclaims his name, the silence of those who helped him, the whispers of the system still breathing in the background. These characters make the story not only thrilling but haunting, not only entertaining but human. Some productions carry with them a shadow life, a series of details, accidents, and behind-the-scenes choices that are almost as fascinating as the story captured on film. With this one, the strangeness lay not only in what appeared on screen, the relentless pace, the fractured memories, but in the way it was made, lived, and remembered by those who built it. To peel back those layers is to discover not trivia, but glimpses of obsession, tension, and serendipity that shape the finished work into something hauntingly singular. One of the strangest facts begins with the cameras themselves. The director wanted the audience to feel every jolt, every stumble, every breathless heartbeat. To achieve this, handheld cameras were used with such ferocity that crew members joked about needing motion sickness medication. Operators ran beside actors on rooftops, weaving through crowds, diving into moving vehicles. The result was exhilarating, but also exhausting. Some viewers later complained of dizziness. Yet that disorientation was exactly the point. It put the audience inside the chase, trapped in the same restlessness as the protagonist. Rarely had a blockbuster demanded such physical endurance from its own crew, and it showed in the rawness of the footage. The rooftop chase in Tangier, one of the most celebrated sequences, carried its own peculiar challenges. The stunt performers rehearsed for weeks on structures that were never meant to hold running men. Walls cracked under impact, windows shattered in ways that weren't scripted. At one point, a camera operator crashed through a doorway alongside the actor, capturing footage so authentic that it was kept in the final cut. It was chaos choreographed into poetry, and yet those who filmed it admitted it felt more like survival than performance. There is also the matter of the sound. The director demanded authenticity, refusing to rely solely on sound libraries. Footsteps were recorded by sprinting across rooftops with microphones strapped to shoes. The crunch of gravel, the slam of doors, the scrape of fists against walls, all were captured live whenever possible. This obsessive pursuit of detail meant that sound editors worked with hours of audio that felt less like film material and more like fragments of reality. When you hear a punch land or a door splinter, you are not hearing a studio trick. You are hearing something very close to the real thing. Another strange layer comes from the secrecy around the script. Pages were distributed in fragments, coded, often delivered the night before shooting. Even actors were sometimes uncertain about the direction of their characters until hours before cameras rolled. This secrecy was partly to protect against leaks, but also to mimic the disorientation of the protagonist, who himself uncovers truth only in fragments. The actors lived the same uncertainty their characters endured, and though it frustrated them, it also infused performances with authentic bewilderment. The editing process has become legendary in its strangeness. The film contains hundreds of cuts and sequences that last only minutes, creating a rhythm of disorientation. Editors worked like surgeons, piecing together footage that often looked chaotic. One described the process as finding coherence inside chaos. Weeks were spent stitching together mere seconds of usable material, yet the result was a rhythm that mirrored the fractured memory and relentless pursuit at the story's heart. What began as a technical nightmare became the very essence of the film's aesthetic. Perhaps the strangest fact lies in how the production blurred reality. Local residents in Tangier reported genuine confusion during rooftop chases, unsure if what they were witnessing was cinema or real pursuit. Crowds gathered spontaneously, altering shots, forcing improvisation. At one point, an actual street vendor joined in, shouting at the actors, believing it to be a genuine brawl. The footage was chaotic but alive, and though most of it never reached the screen, the energy of those moments seeped into what did. There is also irony in the way the film, though about secrecy and control, often teetered on the edge of losing control behind the camera. Ray machines flooded sets, stunt rigs malfunctioned, cameras overheated under relentless shooting schedules. The crew joked that they too were part of a covert operation, improvising under duress, surviving on adrenaline and scraps of sleep. Yet this chaos gave the film its raw authenticity. The unease you feel watching it is not only narrative, it is the residue of a production always on the brink of collapse. One haunting detail emerged from the actor playing the protagonist. He insisted on performing as many of his own stunts as possible, sometimes against the pleas of safety coordinators. His reasoning was simple. The camera must see his exhaustion, his sweat, his pain. Doubles could replicate movement, but not the weight in his eyes after sprinting across rooftops for the 10th time. Crew members spoke of watching him limp off set, bruised and battered, only to demand another take. The dedication bordered on obsession, but it bled truth into the performance. The character's weariness was not acted, it was lived. Even the music carried strangeness. The score was built not from sweeping themes, but from fractured rhythms, snippets of sound that mimicked the protagonist's fragmented memory. Musicians recorded on instruments deliberately detuned, strings stretched until they screeched, percussion played with irregular cadence. The result was music that felt less like composition and more like heartbeat, fractured and urgent. Listeners sometimes found it unsettling. It was that unease that anchored the atmosphere. Finally, there is the legacy of these oddities. Critics later debated whether the shaky camera and fractured editing were innovations or excesses, whether the obsessive realism went too far. Yet, decades later, the film remains etched into memory, not because it followed formula, but because it embraced strangeness. Its chaos was its genius, its accidents became its art, its discomfort became its signature. The strangest fact of all may be this: a film about a man struggling to reclaim control was itself a production teetering on chaos, held together by obsession and willpower. The boundary between fiction and reality blurred, and what emerged was something that felt lived rather than performed. That authenticity, the bruises, the breathlessness, the improvisations, became its truest secret weapon. Critical perspectives open the story wider, taking it out of the frame of cinema and laying it bare as something literary, political, and deeply human. To approach this film critically is to recognize that its events, while clothed in the momentum of an action thriller, are in truth meditations on identity, memory, and power. It is a work that asks as many questions as it answers, and its most significant events serve less as spectacle than as philosophical provocations. The first critical lens lies in its treatment of identity. The protagonist is not simply a spy or assassin. He is a man erased, rewritten, and set adrift. His amnesia is more than a plot device. It is a metaphor for the way systems of power strip individuals of their humanity. A critic might say he represents the modern self, fractured, uncertain, defined less by memory and choice than by the labels imposed by institutions. Each scene where he uncovers fragments of his past is not just a narrative beat. It is a commentary on how difficult, even impossible, it is to disentangle our true selves from the stories told about us by others. In literature, we see echoes of this theme in modernist novels where characters drift without anchor, searching for coherence. Here, the chase sequences mask the same existential search. The rooftop pursuit in Tangier becomes, through critical eyes, more than an exhilarating action set piece. It is the embodiment of survival against systems that wish to consume us. Each leap across crumbling rooftops mirrors the leaps we make between identities, between versions of ourselves written by circumstance. The physicality of the chase reflects the precariousness of identity itself. The fact that it unfolds in a crowded, chaotic city reminds us that identity is never constructed in solitude. It is always in public view, always entangled in others' perceptions and reactions. Another key event, the conversation with the journalist, reveals how fragile truth is. From a critical standpoint, this moment exposes the peril of knowledge in an age of secrecy. The journalist embodies curiosity, the drive to expose what is hidden. But his quick silencing underscores the reality that truth is easily crushed by institutions of power. Critics have argued that this reflects not just the world of spies, but the world we inhabit, where whistleblowers are hunted, journalists silenced, narratives controlled. The protagonist's grief at the journalist's fate is not just personal guilt. It is an acknowledgement that systems of secrecy always consume those who seek to reveal them. The New York car chase is often cited as an apex of action cinema, but through a critical lens, it becomes allegory. The city streets, clogged with traffic and noise, symbolize the machinery of modern life. The protagonist navigates it with desperation, hunted from every angle, his every move observed and tracked. It reflects our own lives under surveillance, the way technology and institutions observe us, reduce us to data, strip us of privacy. The chaos of the chase becomes metaphor for the chaos of existing under constant observation, of fighting to remain human when one is treated as a file, a statistic, an asset. The most significant critical perspective arises in the final act, when the protagonist confronts the program that created him. This is the story's philosophical climax, where spectacle fades and ideas take center stage. He stands in the sterile corridors of power, in the birthplace of his erasure, and remembers his complicity. This confrontation is not only narrative, it is critique. It interrogates the moral compromises of governments, the way power justifies cruelty with words like security and necessity. Critics point out that this scene resonates with postmodern skepticism toward authority. It is an unmasking, a revelation that beneath the rhetoric of patriotism and progress lies violence, control, and manipulation. The protagonist, in choosing to walk away, critiques not only the program, but the very notion that morality can ever be outsourced to institutions. The film's structure itself invites critical analysis. It is episodic, fractured, full of jumps across cities and fragments of memory. This fragmentation mirrors modern existence, where identity is constructed across shifting contexts, where globalization has made us all citizens of multiple places yet belonging to none. The narrative denies us the comfort of a single setting, instead placing us in a constant state of motion. Critics see in the structure a reflection of rootlessness, of the postmodern condition where home is elusive, memory unreliable, and identity always provisional. Thematically, the events invite us to reflect on complicity. The protagonist is not only victim, he is also perpetrator. He remembers consenting to become weapon, to surrender his name and morality. This complicity resonates with critical discussions of power. It shows that systems of control do not function without participants. Evil is not done by faceless forces alone. It is done by people who agree, who comply, who surrender. The tragedy is that by the time he realizes this, it is too late to undo. His reclamation of identity is thus tinged with guilt, a recognition that he cannot cleanse his past, but only acknowledge it. Critics argue that this makes the story more honest than tales of redemption, because it accepts that the scars of complicity never fade. The conclusion, the decision to let him live, to let him swim into the unknown, carries its own ambiguity. Critics debate whether this is hopeful or ironic. On one hand, it suggests survival, the possibility of self-determination. On the other, it underscores futility. He escapes, but the program persists, the machinery endures. His personal reclamation of self does not dismantle the system, only distances him from it. This tension reflects broader, critical debates about agency under systems of control. Can individuals truly resist, or can they only carve out small spaces of survival? The film offers no clear answer, and in that refusal lies its depth. From a literary perspective, the film can be read as modern tragedy. The protagonist is not destroyed by hubris, but by the recognition of what has been done to him and by him. His flaw is not arrogance, but complicity, his suffering not fate, but consequence. Like Oedipus, he seeks truth only to find it unbearable. Like Hamlet, he hesitates between action and reflection, caught between vengeance and resignation. Like Kafka's heroes, he is trapped in a labyrinth of systems that erase individuality. The events, when seen through this lens, are not only thrilling, they are archetypal. Ultimately, the critical perspective shows that this film is not about espionage, but about existence. It uses the language of spies and assassins to ask questions about memory, morality, and the fragile line between self and system. Its events, the rooftop chase, the silenced journalist, the New York pursuit, the final confrontation, are less about plot than about philosophy. They are metaphors carved into motion, action sequences that double as allegories. And that is why the film continues to resonate, because it speaks not only to the thrill of chase, but to the condition of being human in a world where control is always exerted, where memory is always fragile, and where identity is always contested. Production stories often reveal how much sweat, tension, and accident go into the making of a film that on screen feels like a seamless rush of inevitability. With this one, the behind-the-camera tale carries its own momentum, a narrative of improvisation, obsession, and sheer willpower that mirrors the urgency of the story it tells. To walk through its production insights is to see how a restless vision was wrestled into reality, how chaos behind the scenes became the texture of authenticity on screen. The camera style itself was the first battlefield. The director insisted on a restless lens, one that breathed with the characters, stumbled when they stumbled, jolted when they jolted. This meant handheld shooting on a scale rarely attempted in big-budget productions. Operators sprinted beside actors, clambered across rooftops, wedged themselves into moving cars. The result was raw and immediate, but the cost was exhaustion. Crew members recalled days of nausea, bruises from collisions, and aching muscles. Some complained that the images would be too chaotic, too blurred, but the director defended the method with conviction. Life in pursuit is not smooth, and neither should the camera be. In post-production, editors faced reels of footage that looked like chaos, yet from that chaos they carved coherence. What audiences later praised as immersive realism was born from sheer physical endurance. The rooftop chase in Tangier, now legendary, was a logistical nightmare. Houses not built for running feet cracked under weight, rooftops shifted, walls gave way. Stunt performers rehearsed endlessly, yet even rehearsals often ended in near disaster. One camera operator smashed through a doorway alongside the lead actor, the shot so authentic that it was kept in the final cut. Locals in the city sometimes mistook filming for real pursuit, gathering on rooftops to watch or even trying to intervene. The sequence, stitched together in editing, looks like choreography. Those who filmed it remember it as barely controlled chaos. Car chases in New York posed their own challenges. The city was not easily tamed. Streets were shut down at dawn, crews racing against time before traffic resumed. Dozens of vehicles were rigged for controlled collisions, yet unpredictability reigned. One stunt car veered slightly off mark, smashing into barriers harder than intended. The driver walked away shaken, and the footage, raw, violent, was used in the final cut. This commitment to capturing reality meant that even mistakes became part of the film's fabric. Audiences felt the weight of those crashes because they were not fabricated, they were lived. Sound was treated with equal obsession. Instead of relying on stock effects, the team recorded real footsteps, real punches, real doors splintering. Microphones were strapped to shoes during rooftop sprints, capturing gravel and dust in authentic cadence. Stunt performers punched padded walls not for rehearsal, but for recording, their blows layered into soundscapes that felt almost too real. Even the hum of cities was collected live. Street vendors, sirens, traffic, woven into the mix until the film itself seemed to breathe. For editors, this created an overwhelming tapestry of noise, but it was precisely this immersion that gave the story its oppressive realism. Script secrecy shaped production in strange ways. Actors often received pages only hours before shooting. Scenes were rewritten overnight, sometimes on location, sometimes mid-shoot. This secrecy frustrated performers who longed to understand their arcs, but also placed them in the same uncertainty as their characters. The disorientation was intentional. Just as the protagonist uncovered truth in fragments, so too did the actors uncover their scripts. Their bewilderment bled into performances, creating authenticity born from genuine confusion. The editing suite became its own crucible. The director demanded pacing that felt like heartbeat, fractured yet coherent. Editors worked with footage so chaotic that one described it as assembling a broken mirror. They stitched together scenes frame by frame, crafting rhythm from disorder. At times, sequences contained hundreds of cuts within minutes, yet never lost momentum. The editing became an act of sculpting, carving story out of noise. When critics later praised the fractured rhythm, they were praising the result of months of painstaking labor. Stunts often blurred line between safety and risk. The lead actor performed many himself, insisting that exhaustion and pain had to register authentically. Crew members watched him limp off set, bruised, only to demand another take. Safety coordinators grew anxious, yet his determination was unshakable. He argued that doubles could replicate movement, but not the truth in his eyes after sprinting rooftops repeatedly. The performance audiences later admired as raw was, in truth, born from bruises lived on set. Even music was crafted with strangeness. Instead of traditional sweeping themes, the score was assembled from fractured rhythms, irregular pulses, instruments detuned until they screeched. Percussion was played in broken patterns, mirroring fragmented memory. Musicians described sessions as unsettling, producing sounds that felt less like music and more like heartbeat under duress. The result was a score that throbbed beneath the action, never overwhelming but always present, an undercurrent of unease. The production, in many ways, mirrored the story it told. Relentless pursuit, constant improvisation, systems threatening collapse yet held together by sheer will. Crew members often joked they were living their own spy thriller, improvising under pressure, surviving on adrenaline. Flooded sets, malfunctioning rigs, chaotic rewrites, all threatened disaster. Yet each was absorbed into the process. The chaos behind the camera became the authenticity before it. When the film finally reached audiences, its behind-the-scenes turmoil was invisible, transformed into seamless momentum. Viewers praised its realism, its urgency, its refusal to smooth edges. What they did not see was the exhaustion, the improvisation, the accidents that made it possible. For those who made it, the film remains a memory of survival as much as creation, a story lived as much as told. And perhaps that is the greatest insight, that authenticity comes not from control, but from chaos, from risk embraced rather than avoided. Just as the protagonist reclaims his humanity by facing the machinery that erased him, so too did the production reclaim its art by facing the chaos of filmmaking head-on. What emerged was not polished perfection, but bruised truth, and that bruised truth is what still pulses through every frame. The settings in this film are not merely backdrops for chase sequences. They are characters themselves, each one speaking in its own dialect of paranoia, memory, and pursuit. To look closely at these places is to realize that they mirror the protagonist's fractured identity, each location a fragment of his psyche, each city a page in the scattered novel of his life. The cinematic elements, camera, light, sound, breathe these places into something more than geography. They become stages for a drama not of nations and spies, but of the human self struggling to survive erasure. Moscow begins the journey with snow and shadow, a city frozen in secrecy. The protagonist drags himself through its streets like a ghost, hunted, wounded, his body leaving traces of blood in alleys that seem indifferent. The city is filmed in tones of gray and cold steel, its architecture heavy, suffocating. It is less a place than a state of mind, disorientation, pain, survival. As the camera trembles alongside him, the city seems to tilt, to stagger with him. Moscow becomes the embodiment of trauma, the site where his journey begins again, fractured and unresolved. Then comes London, a city of glass and stone, its orderliness masking the chaos beneath. Train stations, offices, the bustle of commuters, all filmed with an eye for surveillance. Cameras watch from corners, reflections multiply in windows, movements feel tracked. Here, the setting is not chaotic like Moscow, but structured, suffocating in its order. It embodies the machinery of control, the way modern institutions mask violence beneath bureaucracy. The film's lens lingers on escalators, on corridors lined with CCTV, on offices where conversations echo with hushed menace. London is not backdrop. It is the manifestation of surveillance culture, a reminder that the protagonist is always observed, always reduced to data. Madrid unfolds in warmer tones, yet its streets are narrow, twisting, claustrophobic. The protagonist navigates its alleys with the sense of being enclosed, pressed in by walls that seem too close. The editing fragments these spaces, turning streets into mazes, echoing the labyrinth of his memory. Madrid is a city of pursuit, where knowledge and danger converge. Its geography mirrors his state of mind, disoriented, trapped, yet moving forward with stubborn insistence. Tangier is perhaps the most striking of all settings, filmed in sunlight and dust, rooftops sprawling into the horizon. The chase sequence here transforms the city into a battlefield of survival. Walls crumble, doors splinter, rooftops echo with footsteps. The camera leaps with the protagonist, crashing through windows, tumbling down staircases. Tangier embodies urgency, the raw pulse of life on the edge. Unlike the cold order of London or the claustrophobic streets of Madrid, Tangier feels alive, chaotic, unpredictable. It is here that survival becomes visceral, where identity is fought for not in words or files but in bruises and breath. The setting's authenticity, crowded markets, bustling rooftops, anchors the film in reality even as the action soars into poetry. Finally, New York emerges as the site of reckoning. Its streets are filmed not as glamorous, but as chaotic arteries of power. Traffic snarls, sirens wail, buildings loom with bureaucratic indifference. The car chase here transforms the city into a labyrinth of steel and glass. Every intersection a trap, every crowd another obstacle. The city embodies modern power at its peak, technological, relentless, indifferent. It is fitting that the final revelations occur here, in a place that symbolizes both opportunity and control. New York is not sanctuary, it is exposure. Its brightness is not comfort, but interrogation under fluorescent lights. Cinematography stitches these cities into coherence while preserving their individuality. Handheld cameras create intimacy, thrusting us into alleys, stairwells, and rooftops. Long lenses flatten distance, making threats feel closer. Rapid cuts fracture time, mirroring the protagonist's fragmented memory. The visual style refuses calm. It insists on restlessness. Even in quiet moments, the camera trembles slightly, as if unable to trust stability. This aesthetic choice transforms the film into more than spectacle. It becomes an embodiment of paranoia, of a life never at rest. Lighting reinforces this unease. Shadows dominate interiors, creating pockets of obscurity where threats might hide. Offices glow with sterile fluorescence, stripping characters of warmth. Rooftops blaze under sunlight that reveals too much, leaving no refuge. Each shift in lighting corresponds to psychological state. Moscow's gloom for trauma, London's fluorescence for surveillance, Tangier's sunlight for urgency, New York's harsh glare for revelation. The world is lit not for beauty, but for meaning. Sound completes the immersion. Rain in Moscow patters like heartbeat. Footsteps echo in London corridors like accusations. Tangier thrums with market noise that fractures into chaos. New York roars with sirens and engines. The sound design never lets us forget that the world is alive, watching, pressing. Silence, when it falls, is rare and weaponized. It signals not peace, but threat, the inhale before violence. The score, fractured and rhythmic, pulses beneath these sounds, never guiding emotion, but amplifying unease. Symbolically, the settings chart a journey from trauma to confrontation. Moscow's shadows, London's surveillance, Madrid's claustrophobia, Tangier's chaos, New York's exposure. Together, they form the geography of identity reclaimed. Each city is not just a location, but a state of mind. Each chase not only pursuit, but allegory. The protagonist's path across them is the path of self-discovery. Fractured, painful, relentless, incomplete. What makes these elements endure is their authenticity. These were real cities, filmed with raw immediacy, their crowds and chaos not staged but inhabited. That authenticity seeps into every frame, making the story feel lived rather than fabricated. The cinematic elements, the trembling camera, the fractured editing, the oppressive sound, did not polish reality, but heightened it, making every detail serve the philosophy at the story's core. And so, when we think of this film, we remember not only characters and plot, but places. The damp alleys of Moscow, the sterile offices of London, the sunlit rooftops of Tangier, the roaring streets of New York. They linger because they were not props, but participants. They were characters in their own right, shaping the story, embodying its themes, reminding us that setting is never passive, it is narrative. Behind the scenes of this film lies a story of controlled chaos, a production that mirrored the very themes it was trying to capture. What we see on screen is seamless. The frantic chases, the jolting edits, the sense of perpetual pursuit. But what happened behind the camera was a kind of lived ordeal where crew and cast carried the weight of exhaustion, improvisation, and obsession. To step into these behind-the-scenes insights is to realize that the film was not only made, it was survived. From the beginning, the production set itself apart by refusing comfort. Handheld cameras were used to capture realism, but this choice meant the crew lived inside constant motion. Operators sprinted alongside actors, stumbling through crowded streets, climbing rooftops, wedging into speeding cars. Some described it as the most physically punishing shoot of their careers. Nausea became commonplace, shoulders ached from hours of shaking rigs, and editors later confessed they had to reorient themselves after sifting through reels that felt like live panic. What we see as thrilling disorientation was, for those filming it, an everyday storm. The 10-year rooftop chase has become legend, but those who made it remember it less as spectacle than as survival. The city itself became an unpredictable collaborator. Locals crowded rooftops to watch, sometimes shouting at actors, sometimes stepping into frame. Stunt rehearsals were endless, yet even rehearsed rooftops cracked under weight. Walls gave way too soon, doors splintered at the wrong moment. One camera operator famously crashed through a doorway behind the lead actor, capturing footage so raw that it was left in. For those involved, the sequence was not choreography, but improvisation, danger negotiated frame by frame. The fact that it became one of cinema's most iconic pursuits is a testament to the crew's resilience in chaos. New York was no gentler. Filming the car chase in live traffic required entire blocks to be shut down in minutes, collisions timed to the second, dozens of stunt cars rigged for impact. Yet unpredictability ruled. One crash hit harder than intended, bending frames and scattering debris. Everyone froze, waiting for injury to be announced. When the stunt driver emerged shaken but whole, the director insisted the footage remain. It was too authentic to discard. The weight of those crashes, the bone-rattling realism, comes not from digital trickery, but from vehicles truly colliding on city streets. Actors carried their own burdens of immersion. The lead insisted on performing many of his own stunts, sprinting rooftops, crashing through windows, enduring bruises that makeup could never replicate. Crew members spoke of watching him limp back to set, refusing doubles, insisting that his exhaustion be real. His performance carried truth because it was lived truth. The tremor in his breath, the weight in his eyes were not rehearsed but earned. The role demanded not only emotional but physical sacrifice, and the actor gave it willingly, determined to embody the fractured humanity at the story's core. Script secrecy created another layer of tension. Pages were delivered in fragments, sometimes hours before filming. Even main actors confessed they rarely knew their full arcs until late in production. This mirrored the protagonist's journey. Uncertainty, disorientation, constant adaptation. Performers often filmed scenes not knowing what revelations awaited their characters. Frustrating though it was, this strategy infused the performances with authentic bewilderment. Their confusion, their hesitation was real. The editing room became a crucible of patience. The director demanded pacing that felt like heartbeat, fractured, relentless, yet coherent. Editors sifted through chaotic footage, often hundreds of cuts per scene. One described the process as finding rhythm in panic. Months were spent shaping seconds, carving coherence out of disorder. The final result, celebrated for its intensity, was not found easily, but sculpted with obsessive care. Sound recording carried its own oddities. Footsteps were captured by sprinting across rooftops with microphones strapped to shoes, doors smashed again and again to find the right timbre of splintering. Punches were recorded with fists striking meat and walls padded just enough to avoid breaking bones. Even city noise was collected live, markets in Tangier and traffic in New York woven into the mix until the film seemed to breathe with its settings. Sound editors recalled leaving work only to still hear those sirens and shouts echoing in their ears, as if the city itself had followed them home. for all its intensity, the set was not without humor. Crew members recall laughing at absurd details, like the endless rows of air fresheners dangling in rehearsal spaces, or locals mistaking staged fights for real ones and trying to intervene. Gallows humor became a survival tool. Between takes, jokes were shared, laughter spilled into alleys, reminding everyone that they were not actually fugitives or assassins, even if it felt that way. But the darkness lingered. Actors admitted to carrying the story home, dreaming of running, waking to the echo of pursuit. Crew spoke of exhaustion so deep it felt existential. The production demanded not just labor, but immersion, and that immersion seeped into lives beyond the set. It was as if the paranoia and urgency of the narrative had bled into reality, leaving everyone involved haunted by its atmosphere. When it finally wrapped, relief washed over the team. They had built something under duress, lived through chaos, wrestled a restless vision into coherence. What audiences later praised as authentic, immersive, and relentless was born from bruises, sleepless nights, and accidents transformed into art. The film itself became a mirror of its own making. Disorder harnessed into story, chaos shaped into meaning. And perhaps that is the deepest behind-the-scenes truth. That authenticity does not come from control, but from surrender to uncertainty. Just as the protagonist reclaims his humanity by facing the machinery that erased him, so too did the crew reclaim their art by embracing the chaos of creation. They did not tame the storm. They ran through it, cameras shaking, hearts pounding, until chaos became cinema. Themes and symbolism are where this story shifts from being merely a tale of spies and survival into something literary, something that breathes on the same shelf as novels about identity, power, and loss. To sit with its images is to realize they are not just moments of action, but metaphors, symbols carved into motion, asking questions that stretch beyond the frame. This is a film about memory, about systems that erase, about the fragile act of reclaiming a self. Its themes reach into the oldest myths while its imagery roots them in a modern, fractured world. The most central theme is identity. The protagonist's amnesia is not a convenient trope for suspense, but a symbol of the human condition in a world where narratives are written for us. He is not nameless by accident. He is nameless because his identity has been overwritten by systems that saw him as tool rather than man. Every chase across rooftops, every fistfight in stairwells, every breathless escape is not only about evading death, but about pursuing coherence. His quest is literary in its essence, kin to Odysseus seeking home or Dante moving through shadowed realms. Memory fragments become the breadcrumbs he follows back to himself. The question pulsing beneath every scene is not will he survive, but who is he? Surveillance emerges as another powerful theme. Cities are lined with cameras, offices hum with computers, phone lines crackle with listening ears. He cannot move without being observed, cannot exist without being recorded. This is not just plot, it is allegory for the modern world, where privacy has become myth, where identity is constructed from data, where individuals are reduced to files. London's train stations, New York's crowded streets, Madrid's offices, all become symbols of a society where the gaze of power never sleeps. He is hunted not by men but by systems, not by bullets but by observation. This theme resonates because it reflects our own world, where every movement online and off is traced, where identity is shaped by those who monitor. Memory functions as both theme and symbol. His amnesia represents the fragility of history, the way our past can be obscured, rewritten, erased. Each recovered memory is double-edged, answering questions but deepening guilt. Memory becomes not salvation but wound. The notebooks, files, dossiers he uncovers symbolize the externalization of identity, the way institutions keep records more faithfully than the human mind. Critics often note how this parallels literature's fascination with unreliable narrators. We cannot trust what he remembers, yet we must trust him to remember. His pursuit of memory is the pursuit of authorship, the attempt to write his own story rather than live one written for him. Violence, though constant, is symbolic as well. The brutal close-quarters fights, the crashes of cars, the sprinting across rooftops, these are not stylized ballets but embodiments of desperation. The fights are clumsy, breathless, improvised. They symbolize survival stripped to instinct, humanity reduced to bare will. Each fight is not about winning, but about enduring long enough to reach the next fragment of truth. Violence here is not spectacle, but metaphor. The clash between human will and systems of control. Geography functions as extended symbolism. Moscow represents trauma, cold, bloodied survival. London embodies surveillance, glass and steel as prison. Madrid reflects claustrophobia, streets like mazes of disorientation. Tangier bursts with chaos and urgency, rooftops crumbling under pursuit, sunlight revealing everything. New York becomes exposure, truth confronted under harsh glare, nowhere left to hide. Each city is less location than state of mind, symbolic stages of his journey from erasure to reclamation. Together, they form an allegorical map of identity, the geography of a fractured self. The theme of complicity deepens the tragedy. He is not only victim, he is perpetrator. His memories reveal that he consented, that he agreed to surrender his name and morality for belonging. This complicity symbolizes the way individuals participate in their own erasure, the way systems thrive not only on coercion but on consent. His journey is not about regaining innocence, but about accepting responsibility. Symbolically, this shifts the story from redemption tale to tragedy. He cannot undo his past, but he can own it. The assassins who pursue him serve as symbolic doubles. They're what he might have remained had he not questioned, had he not remembered. They embody obedience, loyalty without reflection. Each assassin he defeats is a symbolic confrontation with a version of himself without doubt, without humanity. Their deaths are not victories, but mournful recognitions of paths not taken. They symbolize the ease with which one can remain tool and the cost of awakening. The journalist, though brief in appearance, symbolizes curiosity and fragility of truth. He seeks to reveal what is hidden, yet his silencing shows how easily truth can be crushed. His presence reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is dangerous, that systems of secrecy defend themselves ruthlessly. He becomes martyr to truth, his fate a warning that even curiosity can be fatal when systems hold power. The final act's setting, a sterile institution where his erasure was orchestrated, symbolizes the machinery of control. Fluorescent lights, white walls, clinical corridors. These are not neutral, but symbolic of dehumanization. This is where names are stripped, where identities are rewritten. It symbolizes the modern state's ability to unmake and remake individuals, to treat human beings as replaceable parts. His walk through these corridors is symbolic descent into the underworld, confrontation with origin, recognition of complicity. The climax, where he finally remembers and reclaims his name, embodies the theme of reclamation. Yet is not triumphant. The system endures, the machinery breathes on. His reclamation is personal, fragile, incomplete. Symbolically, it suggests that identity cannot dismantle institutions, but can resist them, however briefly. His survival into anonymity at the end is less victory than statement. One can reclaim self, even if the world remains corrupted. The most powerful symbol is water. From Moscow's snow to Tangier's rooftops to New York's rivers, water recurs. It symbolizes survival, memory, rebirth. In the final scene, when he floats in water, we are reminded of baptism, of cleansing, of renewal. Yet the water is ambiguous. Is it rebirth or death? Is it survival or surrender? The ambiguity is the point. Water symbolizes possibility, identity reclaimed, but future uncertain. In all, the themes and symbolism weave a story larger than espionage. This is a narrative about what it means to be human in systems that erase humanity, about memory as both gift and wound, about the fragile act of claiming authorship of one's own life. It uses the language of action but speaks the language of literature, offering symbols as dense as poetry, themes as resonant as tragedy. And that is why it lingers. It does not end with resolution, but with reflection, leaving us haunted by its questions, its imagery, its metaphors. Filmmaking is always the act of translating vision into breath. But with this film, the translation was deliberately jagged, restless, unpolished in a way that became its defining style. Its techniques were not chosen to dazzle, but to unsettle, to make the viewer live inside the chase rather than watch from comfort. To trace these techniques is to see how the film was engineered as an experience rather than a spectacle, and how that choice turned a spy thriller into something closer to literature in motion. The camera itself is the most immediately recognizable technique. Rarely steady, always searching, it trembles with the same unease as its protagonist. Handheld shooting was not a gimmick, but a philosophy. The audience must feel breathless, unmoored, as if they too are hunted. Operators ran alongside actors, weaving through markets, climbing stairwells, diving into cars. The resulting images jolt and sway, often blurring, never granting full control. Critics debated whether this was brilliance or excess, but its intent was undeniable. It pulled us into paranoia, denying us distance. The lens was not observer, but participant, as restless as the man it followed. Editing amplified this philosophy. Sequences were fractured into hundreds of cuts, some only frames long. The rhythm mimicked heartbeat, uneven, urgent. Action was not presented as clean choreography, but as chaos. Editors described their work as finding coherence in panic, sculpting meaning from footage that often looked like disorder. The result was intensity unlike conventional thrillers, a pace that exhausted viewers while immersing them completely. It was cinematic technique weaponized into sensation, forcing us to live the chase rather than watch it. Sound was treated with equal precision. Instead of lush orchestration, the score was built from fragments, percussion irregular, strings strained, electronics distorted. It pulsed beneath scenes like memory itself, fractured and incomplete. Real sound were layered in, footsteps pounding rooftops, doors splintering, fists striking flesh. Silence was used sparingly, and when it came, it carried dread. The soundscape made the world feel alive and hostile, each noise another reminder of pursuit. Viewers often left theaters still hearing the echoes of sirens, footsteps, heartbeats. Lighting choices reinforced mood over clarity. Interiors glowed with sterile fluorescence, stripping spaces of warmth, turning offices into interrogation rooms. Shadows swallowed corners, offering no refuge. Rooftops blazed under harsh sunlight, revealing too much, leaving characters exposed. The contrast between dim interiors and blinding exteriors mirrored the protagonist's psyche, fragmented, alternating between concealment and exposure. Light became not comfort, but accusation, forcing everything into visibility. Stunts and practical effects were crafted for impact rather than spectacle. Rooftop chases used real buildings, car crashes used real collisions. Bruises, broken glass, shattered doors, all carried weight because they were lived. The lead actor performed many stunts himself, ensuring his exhaustion was visible. The fights were filmed in close quarters, fists colliding with walls, bodies slamming against furniture. Violence was not balletic but brutal, improvised, desperate. This grounded realism distinguished the film from more stylized action cinema, making every blow feel personal, every crash inevitable. Narrative technique intertwined with form. The story was delivered in fragments, clues revealed in slivers, answers always partial. Viewers learned alongside the protagonist, piecing together identity from scraps. This withholding of information mirrored his amnesia, making audience and character share confusion. The fractured editing reinforced this narrative fragmentation, making form echo content. The result was a seamless marriage of technique and theme, each reflecting the other. From a filmmaking perspective, one of the boldest choices was restraint in revelation. The film never showed certain horrors directly. Instead, it implied, withheld, left space for imagination. This choice mirrored literature's reliance on suggestion, proving that cinema too could trust the viewer to conjure what was absent. The power of the final images lay not in what was shown, but in what was implied, the ambiguity that lingered long after credits rolled. Box office reception adds another layer of meaning. Executives initially doubted the style, worried the shaky cameras and fractured editing would alienate audiences. Yet when released, the film became a phenomenon. Viewers, instead of recoiling, embraced the immersion. Critics argued, debated, sometimes mocked the techniques, but audiences turned up in droves, drawn by word of mouth that promised not just a film but an experience. The box office success defied predictions, proving that viewers were hungry for stories that trusted their intelligence, for techniques that demanded engagement rather than passive watching. This success also redefined the genre. Other thrillers began to adopt similar techniques. Handheld urgency, fractured editing, brutal realism. Some imitated well, others clumsily, but the influence was undeniable. What began as risk became template. Filmmakers cited its style as liberation, proof that action could be messy, visceral, and still resonate. Its box office power legitimized its techniques, ensuring they would echo for years in cinema. Looking back, what is most striking is how technique and philosophy were inseparable. The camera's restlessness mirrored the protagonist's paranoia. The editing's fragmentation mirrored his memory. The sound's irregularity mirrored his fractured identity. The lighting's harshness mirrored his exposure. The violence's brutality mirrored his desperation. Every choice served not just the story, but the themes beneath it. Technique became symbol, form became content. And that is why the film endures. It was not merely well-made. It was made with conviction that technique itself could tell story, that every blur, every cut, every sound could embody meaning. Its box office success confirmed what its artistry already proved. Audiences were willing to be challenged, willing to endure disorientation, willing to confront story not as entertainment, but as immersion. The filmmaking did not flatter us. It implicated us. And in doing so, it redefined what cinema could be. Conclusions are meant to let us breathe, to hand us back to the world with a sense of closure. Yet this story, and the way we've journeyed through it, does not resolve so much as linger. Its conclusion is not a ribbon tied around chaos, but a mirror held up to us, asking what it means to claim ourselves in a world that insists on writing our names for us. To retrace the ground we've covered is to see how every fragment, the chases, the silences, the bruises, the revelations, was part of a meditation far deeper than espionage. This was not a spy thriller dressed up as philosophy. It was philosophy disguised as a spy thriller. Think back to the man at the center. His arc was not about defeating villains or dismantling systems, but about reclaiming authorship of his own story. He began as Ghost, a weapon without memory, and ended as man, scarred by complicity, yet unwilling to remain tool. That reclamation, fragile though it was, became the emotional core of the narrative. It resonated because it is our struggle too. Who among us has not felt defined by systems, by expectations, by histories we did not choose? His journey is our own longing to say, I am not your file, not your construct, not your instrument. I am mine. The events along the way, thrilling as they were, unfolded like allegories. Moscow was trauma, survival through blood and snow. London was surveillance, order-masking menace. Madrid was claustrophobia, streets twisting like the mind in confusion. Tangier was urgency, chaos, rooftops as metaphors for perilous leaps of identity. New York was exposure, fluorescent truth that burned rather than comforted. Each city was more than location. It was symbol, each one a chapter in the geography of identity. Together, they mapped not just a spy's journey, but the human journey of piecing together self amid systems that fragment us. The characters surrounding him carried philosophies of their own. The assassins were doubles, reflections of what he could have remained had he not questioned. The handler was compromise made flesh, the rationalization of cruelty as necessity. The journalist was curiosity, fragile truth crushed by secrecy. Allies, fleeting and doomed, reminded us that identity is relational, never forged alone. These figures were not side notes, but voices in a chorus of human responses to control. Through them, we saw the spectrum: obedience, complicity, resistance, despair. And through him, we saw the cost of awakening. Themes and symbolism threaded it all together. Memory as wound, surveillance as allegory, violence as metaphor for desperation, water as symbol of rebirth, both hopeful and ambiguous, complicity as tragedy, reclamation as fragile triumph. These themes transformed action into literature, giving every chase, every punch, every revelation the weight of metaphor. The story was never about bullets. It was about philosophy carved into motion. Behind the camera, production itself mirrored narrative. Chaos ruled, handheld cameras stumbling, stunts pushing safety, scripts withheld until the last moment. Actors lived exhaustion, bruises became performance, disorientation became method. Editors stitched coherence from chaos. Sound designers captured reality so closely it felt invasive. What emerged was not polished perfection, but raw authenticity, a film that carried the bruises of its own making. The story of its creation was survival, mirroring the survival we saw on screen. And then there's the legacy, both critical and cultural. Audiences embraced what executives feared. Critics debated its morality and technique, but its box office triumph silenced doubts. Its restless camera, fractured editing, and brutal realism reshaped the genre, inspiring imitators for years to come. It proved that audiences could endure discomfort, even crave it when it served authenticity. It showed that cinema could be messy, visceral, philosophical, and still connect. Its legacy is not just influence, but redefinition. It altered what we expect of action, what we demand of thrillers, what we believe cinema can do. The conclusion within the story is deliberately ambiguous. He floats in water, alive yet unseen, reclaimed yet uncertain. Is it rebirth? Survival? Retreat? The ambiguity is its power. It denies us finality, forcing us to live with uncertainty, just as he does. His story does not close. It continues in imagination and reflection. That refusal of neatness is honest, because identity itself is never finished. We are always rewriting, always reclaiming, always fragmented. And so, as we close our exploration, we find ourselves not released but implicated.